Most vegetable gardens are built on a treadmill. Every spring you buy seeds or seedlings. You prepare the beds. You plant, you tend, you harvest, and then the season ends and you start over. Same beds, same work, same cost, year after year. And most gardeners accept this as simply how vegetable growing works. But there is another way to garden. A way that the people who grew food before the modern seed industry existed understood instinctively, because they had no choice but to understand it. A way that produces more food every year than the year before, that costs less to maintain as time goes on rather than more, and that builds something in the ground that improves with every passing season. Perennial vegetables, plants you put in the ground once and eat from for a decade, 2 decades, sometimes a lifetime. Today I am going to show you 20 of them. And the specific promise of this video, plants that survive harsh climates, poor soil, hard winters, summer drought, is one I am going to keep with every single plant on this list. Because the greatest advantage most perennial vegetables have over annual crops is exactly that resilience. The roots go deep. The crowns go dormant. And when conditions return, the plant comes back, often stronger than the year before. Stay until number 1. Because that plant produces more food per square foot than almost any annual vegetable you could name, grows in soil that most crops would refuse, and has been feeding human communities in the harshest parts of the world for thousands of years. Welcome to the quiet garden. Let's get into it. 20 chives. The simplest entry point into the perennial vegetable garden, and one of the most rewarding. Plant chives once in a border, in a container, in a neglected corner with poor soil, and they return every single year without fail. The clump grows larger every season. The harvest never diminishes. You cut the leaves an inch from the ground, and within days new growth appears. You can harvest 4, 5, 6 times through a single growing season, and the plant responds by growing back more vigorously. Chives tolerate cold that would destroy most annual herbs. They push through frozen ground in early spring before the rest of the garden has woken up, giving you something fresh to harvest weeks ahead of almost anything else. In the hottest summers, they may go briefly dormant but return when temperatures ease. In climates that swing from -20 in winter to 35 in summer, chives simply do not care. The purple flowers that appear in midsummer are edible and beautiful, scattered over salads or infused into white wine vinegar for a product that costs nothing to make and looks extraordinary in a bottle. Divide the clumps every few years, and you have more plants than you can use, to fill new spaces, to give away, to fill containers for the kitchen windowsill. One planting. A lifetime of onion flavor available fresh from the garden for more months of the year than any other herb. 19. Sorrel. Sorrel is the perennial salad and cooking green that most modern gardeners have completely forgotten, and the discovery of it, for people who didn't know it existed, tends to produce an immediate and permanent change in how they think about the kitchen garden. It is a perennial clump that emerges early in spring, produces heavy quantities of large leaves through most of the growing season, dies back in the coldest months, and returns reliably every year without replanting. The flavor is the defining quality, bright, sharp, intensely lemony from natural oxalic acid, in a way that lifts everything it touches and that no other garden plant replicates. Sorrel soup is a classic. Sorrel sauce, leaves wilted in butter and finished with cream, is one of the great simple preparations that French home cooking built around garden ingredients, and it accompanies salmon, eggs, and chicken with a depth of flavor that takes minutes to make and costs almost nothing. In salads, the young spring leaves add a citrus quality without a lemon being opened. The plant grows in poor, clay-heavy, slightly acidic soil without complaint. It tolerates partial shade. In harsh climates, the crowns go deep into the ground and survive winters that would kill most cultivated vegetables without protection. A well-established sorrel plant is essentially indestructible. The roots reach far down, finding water and nutrients in soil that discourages shallower plants. One plant gives you leaves for 20 years. 18. Lovage. Lovage was grown in every serious kitchen garden in Europe and colonial America for centuries, and has nearly completely disappeared from the modern garden, one of the most significant losses in the practical kitchen garden tradition. It is a giant. A mature lovage plant in its third or fourth year stands 6 feet tall or more, a dramatic presence in any garden. Every part is useful. The leaves, intensely flavored, tasting like celery but more complex and aromatic, go into soups, stews, and stocks. The hollow stems are used in savory drinks. The seeds are a spice. The roots were eaten as a vegetable in some European traditions. It grows in poor soil. It grows in partial shade. It tolerates the cold winters of northern Europe and northern North America without protection. It returns every spring from its crown, growing larger and more productive each year. It produces more usable leaf material than any household could reasonably consume, which makes it an outstanding candidate for drying, and dried lovage stores beautifully through winter. The reason lovage disappeared from gardens is simple. When celery became widely available in supermarkets, people stopped growing lovage because they could buy the thing it most resembled. What was lost is a plant with stronger flavor, easier cultivation, greater cold hardiness, and more medicinal value than the commercial crop it was replaced by. 17. Turkish rocket. Turkish rocket, Bunias orientalis, is almost unknown in the modern garden, and it is one of the most practically useful perennial vegetables that can be grown in a harsh climate. It pushes up from the ground in very early spring, sometimes before the last frosts, sometimes through snow, with leaves that are edible as a cooked green, with a flavor similar to mustard greens. Through late spring it sends up flowering stems topped with clusters of small flower buds that can be harvested and eaten exactly like broccoli, and which many people who try them prefer to broccoli for their slightly sweeter, more complex flavor. It grows in poor, dry, well-drained soil where brassicas would fail. It tolerates drought. It tolerates neglect. It self-seeds readily, slowly colonizing available ground and expanding without any effort from the gardener. In climates where cold winters and short growing seasons limit what can be produced, Turkish rocket fills the crucial early spring window when almost nothing else is ready. A plant that grows in conditions other vegetables refuse, provides edible greens from the coldest early spring weeks, produces a broccoli substitute without any annual replanting, and asks for nothing in return. 16. Rhubarb. Plant rhubarb crowns once and they will produce for 30, 40, sometimes 50 years from the same position. The crowns get larger every year. The harvest gets more abundant every season. A plant that gives you 10 harvestable stalks in its first full year gives you 50 or more in its fifth, and continues scaling upward for as long as you tend it. Rhubarb emerges in very early spring, pushing pink and crimson shoots up through cold soil in March or April in most temperate climates, giving you something to harvest before almost anything else in the vegetable garden has germinated. That earliness is one of its great practical qualities. In the hungry gap between stored winter crops and the first summer harvests, rhubarb fills the table. It tolerates extreme cold with complete indifference. In climates that reach -30°C, established rhubarb crowns sit underground through the worst of the winter and emerge the following spring as if nothing happened. Drought affects it less than most vegetables because the deep root system reaches moisture that annual crops cannot access. The leaves are toxic, a fact worth knowing and easily managed by simply not eating them. The stalks are the harvest. Tart, versatile, cooking down beautifully with sugar into compotes, crumbles, jams, and chutneys that work through the full range from sweet to savory. 15. Asparagus. The crown jewel of the perennial vegetable garden. The plant that requires the most patience and gives back the most over time. Plant asparagus crowns and give them 2 full years without harvesting. 2 years in which the plant builds its root system undisturbed, storing energy for the decades of production ahead. In year 3, take a light harvest. From year 4 onward, harvest freely for the 4 to 6 week spring window when the spears push through the soil. And then do the same thing for 30 years. Asparagus beds are passed down through families. They outlive the gardeners who planted them. A planting made today will still be producing for whoever tends the garden in 30 years. The difference between fresh asparagus and commercial asparagus is the difference between a fruit eaten off the tree and the same fruit bought from a cold chain. Asparagus begins converting its sugars to starch the moment it is cut. Spears harvested and eaten the same day, snapped at the base and dropped straight into boiling water, or eaten raw standing in the garden while you pick, have a sweetness and tenderness that no refrigerated, transported asparagus can replicate. Asparagus is cold hardy across almost every temperate climate. The ferny foliage that develops after the harvest window feeds the roots through summer and autumn. Cut it back in late autumn, mulch lightly, and walk away until April. That is the full maintenance requirement of a crop that produces for 30 years. 14. Globe artichoke. Globe artichokes are architectural, silvery, dramatic plants that produce some of the most interesting food in the vegetable garden. The flower buds, harvested before they open, are the artichoke of the kitchen, steamed and eaten with butter or yoli in one of the most satisfying rituals of the summer table. Left to open, they become enormous purple thistle flowers of extraordinary beauty. The plants produce offsets at their base every year, small shoots that can be detached and replanted. Your original planting becomes a growing colony over time without purchasing additional crowns. A single plant becomes 3, then 8, then a substantial group, all from one original investment. In mild climates, artichokes are fully perennial, dying back in winter and returning in spring with no intervention. In colder climates, the crowns need protection. A thick mulch of straw over the crown in autumn is sufficient in most cases, and they return reliably even where winters are harsh. Named cold-hardy varieties have extended the range of artichoke, growing significantly beyond what was possible with older varieties. 13. Jerusalem artichoke. Jerusalem artichoke asks one thing of you. Give it a space it can have. Because once you plant it, it will be there indefinitely, and it will fill the available space with a thoroughness that makes containment the most important early decision. Give it a dedicated bed. Plant it in a corner it can expand into without disrupting other crops. A raised bed with solid sides works well. Then plant it and leave it alone. The tubers taste like a mild, nutty cross between a potato and an artichoke heart. Roasted, they develop a deep caramelized sweetness. In soup with cream and thyme, they are extraordinary. Raw, they are crisp and fresh and work in slaws and salads. They grow in compacted clay, in poor ground, in the neglected edges of a garden where nothing else produces. They come back from any fragment of tuber left in the ground, which means they are effectively impossible to fail with, and effectively impossible to remove once you've decided you want to. The yield from a small area is extraordinary. The nutritional value, particularly in prebiotic fiber content, is among the highest of any root vegetable. In harsh climates, the tubers sit safely in the ground through hard winters and are harvested as needed through autumn and winter. Cold actually improves the flavor by converting starches to sugars. A crop that stores itself in the ground and tastes better after frost is one of the most valuable plants available to a cold climate grower. 12. Horseradish. Once you plant horseradish, you have it. There is no decision to be made from that point forward about whether to grow it again, because horseradish makes that decision for you. Any fragment of root left in the ground, and there is always a fragment, regrows with complete confidence the following spring. This permanence is exactly what makes it valuable as a perennial crop, and what makes gardeners who don't want it permanently in their garden cautious about where they put it. Give it a dedicated corner, plant it in a large container, or accept that wherever it goes, it stays. The root grated fresh, within the hour, before the compounds that create its heat and pungency begin to dissipate, is a completely different ingredient from the preserved sauce in jars. The heat is brighter, cleaner, and more complex. Mixed simply with white wine vinegar and a little salt, fresh grated horseradish, is a condiment that transforms cold beef, smoked fish, and egg dishes in a way that the commercial product cannot match. Horseradish tolerates cold with complete indifference. It dies back in winter and returns in spring from its deep root system, growing vigorously regardless of what the winter delivered. In the harshest climates, it simply goes deeper and comes back stronger. It asks for nothing and produces every year without fail. 11. Good King Henry. Good King Henry, Chenopodium bonus henricus, was one of the most commonly grown vegetables in European kitchen gardens from medieval times through the 19th century, and has been almost completely forgotten in the modern garden. It is a perennial plant that emerges early in spring and provides 3 different edible products across the season. The young leaves are cooked like spinach, mild, pleasant, nutritious, available from the first warm weeks of spring. The young shoots in early spring, when they first push up through the ground, are blanched and eaten like asparagus. The flowering heads, harvested before they fully open, are cooked like broccoli. 3 different harvests. 1 planting. A plant that grows in poor soil, in partial shade, in conditions where brassicas and spinach struggle. It self-seeds gently, gradually expanding its presence without becoming invasive. It contains more protein than spinach, higher iron, and a vitamin profile that matches or exceeds most of the annual greens it was replaced by. It was replaced by spinach when spinach became commercially available, a direct substitution, made without understanding what was being given up. The perennial that asked for nothing was replaced by the annual that needs to be replanted every season. 10. Sea kale. Sea kale, Crambe maritima, grows naturally on coastal shingle beaches, bare gravel, salt spray, wind and cold, and almost no soil, the conditions that most plants consider impossible. And it produces beautifully. In the garden, sea kale is grown from root cuttings or seed and establishes slowly in its first 2 years. From year 3 onward, the crown produces large quantities of growth that can be blanched in spring, covered to exclude light, to produce pale, tender, sweet shoots with a flavor like a cross between asparagus and cabbage that was considered a significant delicacy in 18th and 19th century kitchen gardens. The unblanched leaves are used as a cooked green. The flower shoots are eaten like broccoli. The large clusters of white flowers are fragrant and edible. The roots go deep into whatever the plant is growing in, finding water and nutrients far below the surface. This is why it grows on shingle beaches and why it succeeds in the dry, stony, poor soil gardens where most vegetables give up. Established sea kale is drought tolerant beyond almost any other cultivated vegetable. It winters in the ground without protection in all but the most extreme cold climates. Once established, it produces from the same crown for 20 years or more. A plant that grows on bare gravel, asks for almost nothing, produces edible material at multiple stages of growth, and lasts 2 decades from one planting. 9. Welsh bunching onion. Welsh bunching onions, Allium fistulosum, do not produce a single large bulb. They grow as clumps of upright hollow leaves, multiplying through the growing season by dividing at the base, producing more and more stems from the same original planting. You harvest by pulling individual stems from the outside of the clump, while the center continues growing and multiplying. The flavor is mild, fresh, and onion sweet, exactly the quality of a green onion or scallion, available fresh from the garden for most of the year in most climates. In mild winters, the clumps remain green and harvestable through the cold months. In harsher climates, they die back and return reliably in spring. They grow in poor soil. They tolerate partial shade. They require no maintenance beyond occasional division of overcrowded clumps, which produces more plants rather than wasting them. A small original planting becomes a permanent onion supply that never needs replanting and never stops producing. Combined with chives and a perennial leek variety, Welsh bunching onions complete a permanent allium bed that provides something harvestable from the onion family every month of the year. 8. Watercress. Watercress is the perennial salad green with the most complete nutritional profile of any common salad plant. Gram for gram, it contains more vitamin C than oranges, more calcium than milk, more iron than spinach, and significant amounts of vitamins A, K, and B complex. It is one of the most ancient cultivated salad plants. Eaten by the Romans, grown in streams and water channels across medieval monasteries, used in traditional medicine across European and Asian traditions. It does not need running water to grow, despite the association. It grows in consistently moist soil in a shaded position with the same vigor as in a stream. A container kept well watered in a shaded spot produces watercress reliably. A damp, shaded corner of a garden that produces nothing else is a perfect watercress position. In mild climates, it grows year-round. In harder climates, it dies back in the worst cold and returns in early spring. Once established in suitable conditions, it spreads to fill the available space and requires only harvesting, cutting, and coming back to find new growth in its place. 7. Egyptian walking onion. The Egyptian walking onion does something no other onion does. Instead of flowering normally, it produces a cluster of small bulbils at the top of its stem. Those bulbils are too heavy for the stem to support. The stem bends, the bulbils touch the ground, and they plant themselves. The onion walks. Over time, a single plant moves slowly across the bed, planting the next generation as it goes. You never replant. You harvest from the outside of the ever-expanding colony while the center keeps walking and multiplying. The green tops are used like chives or scallions all through the growing season. The underground bulbs are used like small onions or shallots. The top-set bulbils are pickled, roasted, or used in dishes where concentrated onion flavor is wanted. Egyptian walking onions are cold hardy to extreme temperatures, have been grown in cottage gardens and homesteads for centuries, and produce something harvestable at almost every point in the year. They ask for nothing. They plant themselves, and they never stop. 6. Ostrich fern fiddleheads. In early spring, before most of the garden has woken up, ostrich ferns push tightly coiled fronds, fiddleheads, up through cold soil. Those coiled fronds, harvested when they are still furled and just a few inches tall, are one of the most celebrated seasonal delicacies in North American and Japanese cuisine. The flavor is somewhere between asparagus and spinach, with an earthy, green freshness that is completely of the season. Blanched briefly and sautéed in butter with garlic and lemon, fiddleheads are one of the great spring harvests. Ostrich ferns grow in moist, shaded conditions, stream banks, woodland edges, the damp shaded corner of a garden that produces nothing else. They spread through underground rhizomes, slowly expanding their colony, producing more fiddleheads every spring than the year before. They require nothing beyond being in the right place, shade, moisture, slightly acidic soil, and they give back a spring harvest that cannot be produced any other way. 5. Perennial kale, Dobbinton's kale. Annual kale is one of the most popular vegetables in the modern garden. Perennial kale is almost completely unknown, which is remarkable because perennial kale does everything annual kale does, from a plant that never needs replanting. Dobbinton's kale, a variety of Brassica oleracea that does not go to seed, but instead puts all its energy into continuous leaf production, grows as a spreading, low perennial shrub. It produces edible leaves from very early spring through late autumn and sometimes year-round in mild climates. The flavor is mild, less bitter than many annual kales, and the texture is tender enough to eat raw in salads as well as cooked. In harsh winters, the plant dies back but returns reliably from the woody base. In mild climates, it is essentially evergreen. It does not bolt to seed, which means it stays in productive leaf mode indefinitely rather than switching to reproduction and becoming tough and inedible. Propagate it from cuttings, which root easily, and you can fill a garden with perennial kale from a single original plant without ever buying another brassica seedling. 4. Skirret. Skirret, Sium cisarum, is a perennial root vegetable that was widely grown across Europe from medieval times through the 17th century, and then almost entirely forgotten when the potato arrived and took over every root vegetable niche it touched. The roots are slender, white, clustered in bunches from a central crown, and sweet, genuinely sweet, with a flavor that has been compared to parsnip and sweet potato combined. Before sugar was widely available, skirret was valued specifically for that sweetness. It was grown in monastery gardens, in royal kitchen gardens, and in cottage plots across northern Europe. It grows in poor, damp, heavy soil where parsnips and carrots would struggle. It is cold-hardy across all temperate climates, dying back to its crown in winter and producing strongly the following year. Each plant multiplies its roots from season to season, so the harvest increases every year without replanting. Roasted with butter, the roots develop a deep caramelized sweetness that surprises people who try them for the first time. They were once considered a delicacy. They disappeared from the garden only because the potato was easier to grow at scale and fed more people per acre in the famine years that defined European food history. The potato was the right crop for a hungry continent. Skirret is the right crop for a curious garden. 3. Scorzonera and salsify. Scorzonera, Scorzonera hispanica, and the closely related salsify, Tragopagan porifolius, are perennial root vegetables with a long history in European kitchen gardens that has faded almost completely from modern practice. Scorzonera produces long, black-skinned, white-fleshed roots with a delicate flavor, mild, slightly sweet, sometimes compared to asparagus or oyster in flavor, which is why salsify earned the old name of vegetable oyster. Both plants were grown extensively in France and Britain through the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries as significant kitchen garden crops. Both are fully cold-hardy, growing in deep, well-drained soil and surviving harsh winters without protection. Both can be left in the ground and harvested as needed through autumn and winter. The cold sweetens the roots, as it does with many root vegetables. Both self-seed gently and reliably if allowed to flower, maintaining their presence in the garden without replanting. The flowers of both plants are beautiful. Scorzonera produces bright yellow daisy-like flowers, salsify the large purple flower heads of a meadow plant, making them ornamental as well as edible. Forgotten root vegetables with the flavor complexity that modern breeding has largely eliminated from commercial crops, growing in the ground through winter without any protection, available to harvest across the coldest months of the year. 2. Hardy kiwi. The hardy kiwi, Actinidia arguta, produces smooth-skinned, grape-sized kiwi fruits eaten whole, skin and all, with an intense, aromatic flavor more complex than the supermarket kiwi, and it is cold-hardy to -25 Celsius. Not frost-tolerant, not cold-resistant with protection, cold-hardy to -25 in established plants without any special treatment. A mature hardy kiwi vine in a good year produces 20, 30, 40 pounds of fruit from a single plant. The vine is vigorous. It needs a strong support structure because it becomes large and heavy with production. A pergola, a sturdy trellis, a robust fence. Given that support, it grows, fruits, and produces for 50 years from one planting. You need a female vine and a male pollinator. One male serves up to 8 females, and the planting must account for both from the beginning. The vines take 3 to 5 years to begin producing. That patience is significant and real. What follows it is extraordinary. Fresh, hardy kiwi from a mature vine, picked at full ripeness and eaten the same day, is a fruit most people have never tasted. It is not sold commercially at scale because it is too delicate to survive distribution. The only way to eat it at its best is to grow it. In a harsh climate, in a position with a strong structure and full sun. This vine produces one of the most impressive harvests in the perennial garden, from a fruit that no shop can offer you. 1. Amaranth perennial varieties. Amaranth is most widely known as an annual grain and leaf vegetable, and as a plant with one of the most extraordinary histories of any food crop on Earth, a history we have covered on this channel before. But the perennial species of amaranth, and there are several, native to subtropical and tropical regions and increasingly viable in temperate climates with the warming shifts of recent decades. Take everything that makes amaranth extraordinary and add the permanence of a perennial plant. The nutritional case for amaranth is among the strongest of any vegetable. The grain contains more protein than any common cereal, with a complete amino acid profile including lysine, absent in most grains, making it a whole protein source from a single plant. The leaves contain more calcium than kale, more iron than spinach, and a vitamin profile that places them among the most nutritious greens that can be grown. The plant produces abundantly from poor soil, in heat and drought, in conditions where most vegetables fail. In warm climates, zone 8 and above, some amaranth species behave as true perennials, dying back in winter and returning strongly in spring from established root systems. In colder climates, amaranth self-seeds so freely and so reliably that it functions as a perennial in practice, appearing every year in the same places without replanting, from seeds that survive even harsh winters in the soil. A single large amaranth plant produces thousands of seeds. Those seeds feed birds through winter and produce a new generation of plants in spring. The cycle runs without any intervention. The plant that was once deliberately suppressed to break a civilization is one of the most self-sufficient, self-renewing food plants available to a gardener in any climate. Most people who grow ornamental amaranth for its dramatic plumes of red and gold never think to eat it. They are growing one of the most complete food plants on Earth and treating it as decoration. It grows in the harshest soil, in the driest conditions, in the margins and edges where nothing else produces. It comes back every year whether you ask it to or not. It produces grain and leaves of extraordinary nutritional density from a plant that costs almost nothing to establish and asks almost nothing in return. The most resilient, most nutritious, most self-sufficient vegetable on this list, and the one most people are already growing without knowing what they have. 20 plants, one planting for each, 30 years of food. The perennial vegetable garden is not a replacement for annual growing. It is a foundation beneath it, a base layer of plants that come back every year, that produce more as they age, that cost less to maintain as they establish, underneath which you grow your annual tomatoes and cucumbers and beans with the freedom that comes from knowing part of the harvest is already taken care of. Start with one plant. Chives if you want instant gratification and no risk. Asparagus if you are ready to make the investment in patience for what follows. A hardy kiwi vine if you have the structure and the ambition. Plant it this season, tend it through its first year, and then let time do what annual gardening never allows time to do, compound. The best thing about a perennial garden is that it gets better without you having to do anything more than pay attention. Every year the roots go deeper. Every year the harvest gets larger. Every year the garden becomes more of what it is capable of being. That is what this channel is about, not the quick win, the deep root. Subscribe to The Quiet Garden if you haven't already. Leave a comment with the perennial vegetable you're starting with this season. I read every one of them. See you in the next one.
So hello guys, this is Raman and welcome to our channel The Quick Garden. where we will post the videos about weeds, plants and everything. So hope you will like the every video being posted in this channel, and thank you so much.